You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of foxes. A dimension of otters. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both writing and fiction. Of things and ideas you've just crossed over into the Unsheathed Zone.
Hi, this is Kyle Gold on Unsheathed. As regular listeners of the podcast know, my co-host K.M. Hirosaki and I are big fans of Catherynne Valente, author of such books as Palimpsest, Habitation of the Blessed, Deathless, and the recently released The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making. She was in town to promote that last book, which debuted on the New York Times bestseller list, and graciously agreed to sit down with us for about an hour before her signing at Books Inc., and Books Inc. graciously allowed us to sit in their back room and talk to her. We're very excited for the book and for her, and congratulations to her. And we hope to bring you many more interviews like this in the future. And hopefully all of our interviewees will go on to become New York Times best-selling authors. All right, we're diving right. Do we have the questions or something?
Yeah, I brought them.
Yeah, that would...
Sorry, they got all bunched up because I had them all folded up nervously. I'm just like, is she going to be here? Are we going to get the thing canceled? One of our questions is not, have you been to any weird conventions that people...
Yeah, I'm like, oh, they're not furry questions. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
because the furry fandom's been into my book since day one. I've been listed on the sites and stuff. So.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because I've been writing about talking animals since day one. So
that's true.
There was one site that had listed my books and then which animals could be found in the books. I was like, that's commitment.
See, I only heard about your books from cool people. No, I'm kidding.
Well, and then some of them, I want to pat them on. They're like, precious, because they'll come in my signing line and be like, do you know what a furry is? I'm like, yeah, sweetie, I do know what a furry is.
Oh, God,
I mean, doesn't everybody these days? I'm on the internet.
There was a period of episodes for about 3 months where at least once an episode, it's like, well, so to bring up palimpsest again, but it wouldn't even be in a furry context. It would be like, here's how you can do something like this.
Yeah, well, and I'm the spokesman for the bi-poly kinky generation,
which is awesome. Yeah, so I should start the episode, and then we could have this conversation on the podcast.
That's a good point.
So these are kind of just jumping off points. All right. Hi, welcome to Unsheathed episode number 81.
Are we at 81 already?
We're at 81, 3 times 9.
Oh my God.
I am Kyle Gold.
I'm K.M. Hirosaki. That's right. I remember you making you do the intro in French last time. Sorry. Go on.
And we're joined today by a very special guest, author Catherynne Valente. Welcome.
Hi.
Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, you did. I'm very proud of you.
Awesome.
I've been having to get militant about that.
How do people mispronounce
Valente. Everyone says Valente.
Oh, okay.
And I let it go for a long time because whatever, it's fine. But now I figure if my editors are saying it wrong, I should probably correct people. So everyone's been shocked that my name is not pronounced Valente.
So it's Valente.
It's Valente.
Great. She's the author of many books. The most recent, I think, to come out in print is The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making.
Yep.
And so we're going to talk to her about her books and about animal people and whatever else comes up in the conversation.
Okay.
So first of all, congratulations on the publication of Fairyland.
Thank you so much.
It's awesome. For those of our listeners who don't know it, do you want to talk a little bit about the journey that the book itself has had quite a remarkable journey.
I mean, it's such a strange little story because it was part of Palimpsest, which is a very, very adult novel that I wrote. Well, I don't even remember when I wrote it, but it came out in 2009, and it was a book within a book. There's a couple of books within Palimpsest, and one of them is the protagonist's favorite novel from when she was a little girl, The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland. And it was meant to be kind of a pastiche of 1920s and 1930s children's novels that had, fairyland as this generic kind of world instead of the very specific world building we like to do these days, and had this long, gnarly title, and had this whole backstory about the author who wrote it and all of those sorts of things, which is kind of woven into the background of Palimpsest. And so I'm stuck with this huge, long title now, which I don't think that anyone would have really gone for if I had gone through normal channels. It barely fits on the cover of the book.
But it's fun to say.
It's fun to say, but so while I was touring for Palimpsest, which was the last time I was out here in California, people kept asking me, is it a real book? I said, no, it's not a real book. They could be forgiven for thinking so, though, because we did an alternate reality game to promote Palimpsest, and we created fake Amazon pages for Fairyland and for A History of Train Travel on the Japanese Isles, which is another book within a book in Palimpsest, and a whole backstory for the authors, and I wrote more. I wrote about a page and a half of Fairyland as an Easter egg to find in the alternate reality game. So reality and fantasy were very muddled back then. And they said, well, when are you going to write it? It would be so amazing if you wrote it. I was like, I will never write it. No! Who would ever publish such a thing, a YA book that was so deeply connected to a really very not YA novel? Mm-hmm. If there's any kids listening, don't read Palimpsest till you're older.
Or get your mom's permission.
Yeah, there's not supposed to be kids listening, and we've recommended Palimpsest a couple times on the show, so hopefully, but...
So it wasn't a couple of years later. Gosh, it was a couple of months later. It seems like the time just was much bigger, but it wasn't. Mm-hmm. My husband was laid off during the economic crash, and 6 months went by, and 9 months went by, and our savings was out, and he hadn't found a new job yet. He's a programmer, which it's a lot easier to find work out here as a programmer than in, let's say, Portland, Maine, mm-hmm. which is where we were living. And we had just moved there, so we'd spent all of our money to move to Maine, and then he was laid off from the job. So it was really a tough time. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm a writer. This is what I do. This is the age of crowdfunding, so I'll write a novel online. And originally, I think I was going to write something just completely original, just pull one of the ideas that was in my trunk out and do a novel. But I remember the day I was sitting at my computer talking to my friend on IM, and I went, oh, I could write Fairyland. Everyone wants to read Fairyland. And my friend said, oh my God, please write Fairyland. and so I did. I posted a chapter every Monday with a little button that said donate whatever you think the book is worth, or don't, read it for free if you don't want to donate. And I recorded myself reading it, and I did a couple of authors' commentaries and fun little things for people. And it went truly viral. It really caught on, and people started linking to it and talking about it, and there was a fan community in about 5 seconds, and people were making their own little felted wyvern/library.
Uh-huh. The Wyverary is awesome.
Yeah, he's everybody's favorite character. And it went like crazy. And I stayed fairly far ahead for the posting schedule, so I had it done long before it was finished posting online, and my agent started shopping it around, and Fywell picked it up before it got nominated for the Andre Norton Award, which was crazy because they'd only just changed the rules 2 years before so that things that were published online were eligible. And, no book had the sort of steam behind it to make the ballot yet, and this one did. And, boy, I only went to the award ceremony at all because there was a space shuttle launch. That was why I went. I wouldn't have gone because I was so sure I wasn't going to win. Scott Westerfeld and Melinda Lowe and John Scalzi, they were all up for it. It was there were 8 books on the ballot. I was sure I wasn't going to win. And I went because it was my husband's dream to see a space shuttle launch, and the last time I saw one was Challenger, so I thought I could replace that memory with something a little better.
Oh man, remember Pokey Brewster?
Yeah, totally. I was in first grade in '86 when Challenger went up, so
that was
I was one of those kids. Oh yeah, one of those kids sitting in the classroom.
Yeah, I was in a classroom in college, and my physics professor came and wrote on the blackboard. So that always makes me feel old.
So me and her can hang out then. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You kids get off my lawn.
But somehow it won. It was a very Oscars moment. I was so nervous I couldn't even eat my lime sauce salmon thing that they put in front of me at the hotel, and they called my name, and he didn't even get through the whole title before people were applauding and clapping, and I went up and I gave my speech that I had barely written 3 minutes before the awards started because I was so convinced that I wasn't going to win. And so this is the first self-published thing to win a major literary award. It has had an extraordinary journey. It's hard for me to believe it only actually came out last week.
It seems... Yeah. I know I've been hearing about it for a while. And I remember when it won the award and everything. Mm-hmm. It's just really great. Yeah. So, what else do I have here? Well, so... One of the things that I thought was really interesting about it, and I just read this a couple days ago, was John Scalzi promoted the book on his blog, and his feature is called The Big Idea, and he asks the authors, what's the big idea of your book? Mm-hmm. And I thought you had actually a great answer for Fairyland. It's very great and very simple.
Yeah, the big idea is saying yes. I love portal fantasies. I actually think it's one of the most universal stories. We tell portal fantasies over and over and over again. We tell them in fiction, in Harry Potter, and most of the most famous children's books, Wizard of Oz and Phantom Tollbooth. These are all portal fantasies where you find a portal to another world. But we tell it in our own lives too. We say, one day I'll make $1 million and I'll enter a magical kingdom full of riches and plenty. Or, we write these books about middle-aged college professors that have affairs, and they think that they're entering a wonderful new land of desire and wonder and fabulousness, and it turns out to be pretty crap. But
see, this is where I get my inspiration from, people. If you're wondering, what
No, I was going to say we had a professor who was a middle-aged professor, and he had real good taste in books, except he always had a weakness for those books where the middle-aged professor is wooed by the 20-year-old woman and.
Well, and they think they're going to be the king of that fantasy land, too, just the way that heroes always are, and they never are.
I read these books, and I see the mistakes people make, and I will not make those mistakes.
Yeah, so.
Stay in school, kids.
So the thing that bothers me so much about a lot of portal fantasies, especially, it's less of an issue in the books of Wizard of Oz, but let's be frank, the movie is what caught American imagination about the Wizard of Oz. And Alice in Wonderland and all of these that I love so dearly is that the little girl finds her way into this wondrous place out of a dirt farm in Kansas or a very repressive life in London, et cetera, et cetera. And the first thing she wants to do is go home. She wants to turn on her heel and go right back home. And that is completely unrealistic as far as the reaction of any 12-year-old child I know to finding a magical kingdom full of magical things. And I wanted a book where a girl said, awesome, I am going to go have dragon friends and have adventures and it's going to be super great, instead of just deciding to reject that world. And because portal fantasies are very often, especially those written for children, are very often about adulthood and coming of age, what's really happening there is that they're rejecting adulthood. They're rejecting this world that seems very strange to them, much as adulthood does to children, where there's all these arcane rules that don't seem to have any connection to reality, and these vague ideas about sexuality and power and wealth that you don't really understand, but they seem just extraordinary and you can't quite touch them. But it's a rejection of all of that and saying, no, I want to stay a child forever, and not the good kind of child that has a magical imagination, but the kind of child that works on a pig farm for the rest of their lives and never actually grows up or sees the city or anything. And there's also kind of a rejection of urbanity by the rural living. And I didn't want any part of that. It's not how I see things. I look at the world that I live in, which is a fairly extraordinary place with the internet and all of the wonderful people I've met through my subcultural communities. And I live my life embracing the world, not rejecting it. And that's what I wanted to write a book about.
Yeah, and I was going to say, a lot of those fantasies that come from like the late 1800s, early to mid 1900s are about staying with your community. It's like, thinly veiled, Dorothy, well, the city might seem like a wonderful magical place, but you really should just stay home.
Well, and our communities aren't geographically based anymore. They just aren't. We don't live in that world. And though Fairyland is actually set during World War II, its sensibility is very much the decentered, modern, you can find your communities anywhere. They don't have to be connected to your blood and the land your family's lived on for the last 3 generations and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and September's parents in the book are working and moving around a lot.
And they're working class. Usually in portal fantasies, you get aristocrats or you get extremely rural farming, and they're middle class working.
Right, but it feels like a modern sensibility from that.
Yeah.
From that.
Well, and it never says World War II. It actually never says an age or an era that it's happening in. It makes reference to men going away to war and women working in factories. But if you think that wouldn't happen if we had a draft now,
Yeah. Quite.
If let's try not to think about that too hard.
Yes.
So again, sort of broaching into this whole modern sensibilities with fairy tale elements. I actually just recently finished reading Deathless, which excellent book, by the way. I really enjoyed that. And I just sort of wondering, what was it about sort of like this Russian folklore that really drove you to try to write, a unique take on that?
Well, so my husband's Russian. His name's Dmitry, so I can stop saying my husband. Dmitry is Russian, and his family lived with us for quite a little while, and so I was listening to their stories about life in the Soviet Union a lot, and Dmitry would live translate Russian fairy tales for me. He'd read the Russian out loud in English. And he was reading me the story of Marya Morevna and Koshchei the Deathless, and Koshchei the Deathless is kind of the devil of Russian folklore. He is he's in almost every story. He kidnaps maidens. That's what he does. He just has the one job. And
and if you can get
yeah, exactly. And in this one story, I'll start sort of halfway through, but Marya Morevna and Yvonne the Fool get married, and they go back to her house, which I thought was interesting to begin with. And she says, you can go into any room, but don't go in the basement. Standard Bluebeard contract, I suppose.
Right.
And of course, Yvonne goes into the basement immediately, and Koshchei the Deathless is chained up on her wall. And I was like, whoa. Why is he chained up on her wall? And Dimitri was like, I don't know, it's not really part of the story. I'm like, no. It is the story. Like, what, is it on purpose? Like, did she capture him? Is it on, like, did he let her do that? That's really kinky, like chained up on the wall in the basement. Like, this is not quite normal fairy tale stuff. And he's like, look, there's like 2 more acts to this story. You know, this is just the beginning, and Yvonne has to go and get her back from Koshchei. I'm like, I don't care about Yvonne. He's terrible. I hate him. And well, all I wanted to know was, why was he in that basement? And so the seed of this book, I said, I'm going to write a book about this. Right then, it was like 2005. And that was the seed to why is he in that basement. The whole book kind of swirls around that basement and that moment. And I wanted to combine it with World War II and the Stalinist era, in part because there's a grand tradition of that in Russian literature. The only way you could critique the government was by writing science fiction and fantasy. So there's all these amazing books, The Master and Margarita being quite a well-known one, where the line between fantasy and reality is just completely gone. There's no differentiation, and I loved that. And I would listen to stories from Dimitri's grandmother and his mother and his father about what happened after the war and the lives they led. And Dimitri's grandmother is former KGB, so some of those stories were pretty intense. And so it all kind of came together in one novel.
I have to say, now that you've said that, that's sort of, what, inspired you to write this. I actually think that the answer you came up with for why he's chained in a basement was actually pretty clever. And now, thinking back on it and sort of unraveling the story from that point instead of from either the beginning or the end, you're sort of like, okay, yeah, now a lot of the thought process seems to make sense. I'm still sort of just marveling over that. I get to process it more later.
Okay. One of the things we were just talking about a little bit prior to the podcast is you said the furry fandom's been into the books from day one, and talking animals and stuff, and so which is something that we find interesting because the furry community's now got a whole lot of its own writing going on, and people within the community producing writing, which is amazing, and we find that a lot of times they've become very insular, and it's a little difficult to get people now to reach out beyond what is being sold at conventions and whatnot. But I thought that your story about the people who put up what animals could be found in the books. And the fact that you do use animals, I mean, they recur in, I think, all the books of yours
I don't
that
think
I've read.
I've written a book that doesn't have talking animals in it.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it's folkloric. Talking animals are hardcore folklore.
Right.
There isn't a culture that doesn't have a story of animals that have the same sentience that humans do. The Labyrinth was my first novel, and I think there's only one human character in Labyrinth. Everybody else is either a sentient maze or an animal. That's it.
I just say that I love that it's possible for you to utter that sentence.
And so I remember finding a website shortly after Labyrinth showed that it had some legs. It was a Locus recommended book, and that it was listed with a bunch of other books that had positive furry images, and it had a list of the animals that could be found in the Labyrinth, and then the other books of mine as they came out, because they all do. All of them.
I'm amused that you know about this list and I don't.
I mean, that's what comes from ego Googling.
Yeah. I've also heard that called vanity surfing.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. I do that from time to time.
Oh, yeah.
Googling oneself just sounds dirty.
Yeah. Self-Googling.
Insert 30 Rock reference there.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought of that. Which is sad.
Sorry. It's one of our 30 Rock is one of our standby reference shows. But that's cool. It's a real folkloric thing, and what's interesting is we find that books that are sort of using them as folklore devices as opposed to the books that are written from a purely furry fandom sensibility, the furry fandom books have a little different spin on them, and it's much more I don't quite know how to say this. I think the way
I think it's the difference between animals that happen to be people and people that happen to be animals.
Okay.
all right.
No, I mean,
I think. Yeah, I mean, I think the
the way that,
asking-
like, quote unquote, we would do it is they're people first, and they happen to also be animal critters. Not so
Right,
much
whereas
that, like,
part of what I'm interested in is non-human intelligences. You know,
well, mazes and
yeah, obviously.
Right.
Yeah. But I suppose that palimpsest is a good one for that because of all the people with the animal parts grafted on.
yeah.
well, and also the city itself,
Yeah, well, yeah.
which is kind of cool too.
Yeah. I dig making non-sentient things sentient.
Yes, and and actually the other book that we've talked about of yours is Habitation of the Blessed, which goes kind of all out in that.
Oh yeah, well,
in that
but you know
frontier.
that's not from me. You can't spell Prester John without furry, really. Everyone there is some kind of bizarre monster. But I love monsters. Like monsters are my people. I from the very beginning, I've wanted to write monstrous voices and talk about monstrous communities and how monsters stick together and protect each other.
Which is also a big theme in Deathless, too.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think we get a lot of those same themes too. Sort of the outcast and the community of outcasts is a big thing, and that runs through a lot of the fiction that we see coming through here. But
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about how furry fandom has always been into my work. I think that part of the reason, even though I'm not myself a furry, is that I'm from a mainstream press. I'm published by the big New York presses, and yet all of these themes are there in my work. And you can't always find these kinds of really subversive, kinky sorts of themes in mainstream press books.
and one definition actually that one of our publishers uses is because people ask him what makes a book quote unquote furry, and he's like, well, it's if the author identifies themselves as a furry, then it's a furry book. But what we keep trying to sort of tell people is there's these really good books out there that have these elements as well, and trying to convince people to just sort of look out there for more stuff, because just because you belong to this community doesn't mean you have to stay within the community.
Right,
also,
right.
Yeah.
then there's all kinds of stuff out there to look at and listen to and read and enjoy.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of my books deal with alternative sexualities in general, and the embracing of that and treating them as just normal. I don't ever have a moment in palimpsest where we sit down and talk about what it means to be gay, or what it means to be poly, or anything like that. It's not. And in Deathless, we certainly don't have, especially in Stalinist Russia, we don't sit down and have a conversation about this being kind of kinky BDSM stuff. It just happens, and it's just normal, and it's people exploring what they want and what it means about them personally, that these are things that they react to with desire. And I mean, I think that is a powerful thing. When I'm at conventions, furries come to my readings all the time, sometimes in their full gear. And I'm one of the writers that will talk about furry fandom and furry sexuality without talking down to them or making it.
People don't even come
Furry.
to my readings in full furry gear. What am I doing wrong?
They came to our live podcast.
Well, conventions. I mean, like
Oh, okay,
conventions
that's
where
true.
they're, yeah. I think that there's a whole different rule set about costumes at conventions.
Yes. Wherever they can get away with it.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Pretty much.
I'm just thinking of the horror stories I've heard about Dragon Con now.
Oh, see, I've never been to Dragon Con, so.
I hear it's just sort of like people's like, oh, you think furry conventions are weird? Like, you go to Dragon Con, it's like, here, let me watch me put this metal spike through my arms.
Oh, well,
just
yeah.
like,
There's-
All kinds of stuff.
yeah.
wasn't that delightful?
Yes.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that image. Bring up a Star Wars reference. What are you working on next?
So I'm working on the sequel to Fairyland, which is called The Girl Who Fell Beneath Fairyland and Led the Revels There. I'm working on a new novel, which is a deco punk space opera alt SF Hollywood mystery, kind of.
Okay, so it's not just us that comes up with these weird descriptions.
I'm really bad at
Right.
pitching my books. That's why I have an agent. So
That
there's
sounds
that
amazing,
thing. Well, there's a short story online at Clark's World already called "The Radiant Car Thy Sparrows Drew," and it's an expansion of that story.
Okay.
And
Clark's World magazine with an E in there.
Yeah.
Clark E.S.
Yeah.
World.
So those are the main things I'm working on. I have an AI novella that'll come out in the fall, and I always have a bazillion things that I'm doing.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I do the
do
same.
you.
I know. I do the same thing.
I don't have enough discipline to do more than one thing at a time is my problem.
And
And
you
it
have
is
to-
a problem.
The second Prester John book is
Oh yeah, sorry. The Folded World's already done. So
That's done, okay.
yeah, it's coming out in November.
cool. Wow. So you've got like a ton of books coming out.
2011 was all like I knew a while ago. 2011 was going to be a crazy year.
That's very cool. So, so what would you say to people who want to try to kind of get their own writing out there? And obviously, and I'm not quite clear on this, but did you start with some self-published online books, or
No, it was small presses.
It was all small press.
Yeah. I
Because you
didn't
have a
start out.
couple books up on your website that you're
Yeah.
selling electronically, and those were small press first.
Yeah, The Labyrinth, Yumi no Han, The Book of Dreams, and The Grass Cutting Story were all small press. I did another serial novel way back in the day, around early 2005, when I just started publishing, because I was living in Japan, and I was there because of the military, and the military wouldn't pay to bring my dog home. And I didn't have enough money to bring my dog home from Japan, so I wrote a novel online to raise money to bring her home. I still have her, Sage, and that's called The Ice Puzzle, and that'll actually be coming out in hardback from PS next year. So all of my internet projects will be happily living between covers by next year.
Just real quick, where in Japan were you living?
I was in Yokosuka.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I lived up in Aomori near the Misawa Air Base.
Yeah, it's just south of
Yeah.
Yokohama. Yokosuka
Yeah.
is the Navy base.
Right. I was just like curious. I was like, wait.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's like one of three answers that this could
Yeah,
possibly
pretty
be
much.
if it's like, a military base in Japan. But
So the lessons we're taking away from this for our listeners is you have to really need money, and then
No, I
Write
mean,
a
but I
book
did-
out there
But
to
I've
get-
also done, all of these books traditionally, and
Right.
people ask me all the time, how can I make my book a self-publishing success like yours? And I'm like, well, try publishing 7 novels through traditional methods first.
Right.
That's what worked for me. And when you do publish through traditional means, you get to know the whole community, and you're part of the conversation, and that helps when you need to, spread word about a project. Which is not why you should be part of the conversation. The conversation's awesome. That's why you should be part of the conversation.
Right.
But, you get out of the internet exactly as much as you put into it. And usually exactly the same kind of things you put into it. So if you put a lot of douchey behavior on the internet, you get a lot of it back. If you put a lot of good energy into the internet, it'll give it back to
Yes.
you.
and are you? I know you were running for an SFWA position.
Yes.
Are you in that position currently?
It hasn't been announced yet, so I can't tell you, but I can tell you I ran against nobody, so, odds are good.
Excellent. Well, we'll be pulling for you.
man, why can't I ever have a good fortune to be in a race against nobody? That never happens. I can't even do that on Foursquare.
But that's another way to sort of be part of things. And
Yeah.
there's these
You take
groups
some
and-
responsibility for your community. You get the community you create,
Right.
and I wanted to be part of. I think that what John Scalzi and Mary Robinette Cole have done for SIFWA is extraordinary, and I wanted to be part of it.
Very cool. How are you enjoying our weather out here in California?
It's awesome because I hate the heat. I moved away from California to Maine on purpose because I hate the heat. So I think it's fantastic. It's 50
Yes.
degrees outside, and it's just about 50 degrees in Maine right now. So
and
awesome.
it's drizzling here, and it's probably
Yep.
drizzling back in Maine too.
Yep. So my advice for people who are trying to break in, as you were saying earlier, is you need to read a lot. Everything, and not just stuff that is in your particular subcultural genre, but you
Yeah.
need to be reading a tremendous amount of books. I read somewhere that you should turn over half a library to make one novel, and I think that's true. It might be an understatement. You will never be able to tell what's good or bad without reading. And the people who want to be writers and they are not avid readers, I don't understand them at all. Who
Right.
do you think is going to read
yeah,
your
I
books?
don't-
If you don't think reading is important, why should I pay attention to anything you have to say?
So these are invariable the people. It's like, I wrote this 300,000 word thing, and it's just like, yeah,
Yep.
no.
No.
Especially if nobody knows who you are, nobody's going to want to sit and read all of that.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And see, people, it's not
It-
just us that tell you these things.
Asterisks, in most cases, there are exceptions
Yes, your
to
mileage
everything.
may vary.
If I don't know who you are, I'm sorry. I'm not going to read your 300,000 word. I wouldn't read 300,000 words of what I wrote.
Yeah, and a lot of we get the people that they live very much in their own heads, and they've read a couple things, and then they're like, well, I want to write my own spin on
Right,
that.
right.
And And it's not just, seeing what else is out there, what's good and what's bad, because you do have to read the bad in addition to the good.
Yeah, you have to be
You
able to recognize
have to
it.
learn what not to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Or if you read a book that other people highly recommend and you don't like it, you have to be able to understand why you don't like it and what you don't like about it.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
To not like it.
It's totally okay. I dislike all kinds of things that people like, and obviously, if you've read my blog, and I like
everybody
things that
should.
people don't like too. So
Yes. But also, sort of, as you said, where the inspiration for Deathless came from, from reading other people's stories, you get inspirations for sort of side ideas and like, well, hey, what would happen, why this one scene in this one book, why did that happen? Well, I could write a whole book about that.
very often I end up writing a book because I got mad at a genre, and wanted to punch it, I guess. So
If your genre had a
inspiration.
face, I would punch
Yes,
it.
if your genre had a face, I
What
would
happened with
punch it.
Jim Butcher in the first book of the Dresden Files? He's like, this is all just tripe. And then, like, apparently an instructor was like, well, why don't you try writing it? And he's like, okay, I will, just to show you how awful it will be. And now he's like 14 books into the series, and he's like, oh.
Wow. But yeah. Is there anything else? We're just having fun chatting.
I don't have anything in particular I want to talk about, but
Do you have any tours coming up? Or
I'm on tour right now, so I'm in Portland next. Not my Portland,
Oregon.
other Portland.
Right.
We're first Portland, proper Portland. Other Portland is named after us.
So you always have to call it like Portland, Oregon.
I was
Just to make
on
sure.
Twitter. I always have to say Portland, Maine, because otherwise people would be like, "Oh, I'll meet you at such and such." I'm like, nope, wrong Portland. And so now I'm in wrong Portland next as of tomorrow, and then I'll be in Seattle over the weekend and on Monday, and then New York for BEA, and then I will be in Wisconsin for WisCon at Madison.
Speaking of, like, no, you're not going to run into me, I'm amazed by how often people are like, hey, I'm going to be out in California. Like, maybe we could meet up. And I'm like, oh, yeah, where are you going to be? It's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to be in L.A. And I'm like, you are 500 miles away. Like, no.
Welcome to the East Coast knowledge of West Coast geography.
Like
That's
like I said,
Yes.
like I grew up in Massachusetts, and like even my family, like they'll see things on the news like wildfires down in like the San Bernardinos, and they're like, "Oh my God, is that near you?" And I'm just like, you know what? Like when something's happening in Maryland, I want to call you and make sure you're okay.
When I lived in Japan, my mother-in-law would call whenever there was a big earthquake. I'm like, I'm not even on the same island. Like, I'm not anywhere near where that happened. But I've lost my California legs. Like, we've been driving around the Bay Area so much, and I'm like, oh my God, everything is so far. If we drove this far in Maine, we would be in Boston. Like. And I grew up on the West Coast. I know what distances are like here, and yet somehow I have just completely forgotten.
Yeah, like the driving mentality in New England is great. Like you'll be like in Boston, it's like Nashua, that's like 40 minutes away, and I'm just like, I can't even get to San Francisco from here, and that's technically where I tell people I live.
And I had the inverse of that, where I had my aunt flew out to a wedding in San Jose and did not tell me that she was coming, and she didn't call until she was driving down 101 and saw a sign specifically for the town that she recognized from my address, and she was like, wait, is that here? And then she called me and she's like, I think I just passed your exit. I'm like, yeah, you just had lunch at the grocery store where we go all the time. So
Yeah, I mean, it is just so vast out here, and I don't know, it's all in the same general area, right? Petaluma is pretty much the same as San Francisco. It's fine.
sure, Northridge,
Chico.
whatever.
Yeah.
But it's cool.
so how can people find Twitter?
Yeah, so
All my tags.
All your tags.
So
Go
I
ahead.
am
Tell
on
people
Twitter
how to
at
find
Cat Valente. That's Valente with an E on the end. I am Yuki Onna on LiveJournal, YUKI-ONNA. I am Catherine Valente on Facebook. CatherineMValente.com is my website where all of that stuff can be found also. I think that's it. I think that's all my interwebs. I'm the Learned Cat on Ravelry. If there's knitters listening, I think there's quite a bit of venning between furry and knitting fandom.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Geek girls, we all knit. Like, it's like 90% of us are also knitters.
That's a secret that they keep from us guys.
Yeah.
It's
I guess so.
well, I know a couple of guy knitters. it is an acceptable thing for guys to do. I wish more guys would do it.
The
Plus, you get so much credit. Like, you don't even have to be good at knitting, but if you're a male doing it, people will be like, "Oh my god, wow, that's just amazing!" I've got like this web of spidery lace, and he's doing some dinky ass thing, and he's just a rock star, and I'm like, all right.
The best I can do is I can sew a button back onto a pair of pants if I watch a YouTube video immediately beforehand.
Knitting's easy. It's actually just tying knots and doing math. It's not very
I know
hard.
how to talk about knitting. Knit one, purl.
Knit one, pearl
Math,
two.
that's the
That's
thing with
what I know.
numbers that makes
That's
my head
it.
hurt, right?
That's all I got. And you guys should follow the live journal because she posts excellent long discussions about things that you might not usually think about.
Kyell has been known to link to her a lot.
I do link to your journal a lot. You posted a long discussion about Tangled recently.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Oh, I got some pushback on that. Don't mess with Disney, man. They bite.
Wow.
But no, not from Disney. I didn't get any pushback from Disney, but like
the
people get
Disney
very
fans,
attached to
yes.
Disney movies.
Yes.
And I liked Tangled, but I could not escape that the witch was very coded as a Jewish woman, and it bothered me because she's basically eating this young Aryan woman to stay youthful, and there's like gender and race and blood libel issues there, and I was like, oh, I can't. This is really disturbing and upsetting. And I mean, the post was to say, am I crazy for seeing this? And most people seem to think, no, not at all. That it was fairly obvious. And in fact, the casting call for that character talks about that she's a Jewish mother. But then,
And her name in the
yeah. Well,
thing.
I mean, but Mother Gothel is the name of the character in many versions of that story. It doesn't really make it much better. It's still a very common Jewish surname, but
It just means you're carrying forward the prejudices
yeah,
that
I mean, like,
created the
'cause
original fairy tale.
Germany in the 1800s was so up on Judaism, like it was great. But yeah, some people felt that I was way reading into things, and
I would almost more ascribe it to ignorance, and just sort of, what you do. Like, you're very aware of all the symbolism and imagery and everything that you use in the stories and that you adapt to the stories. And I think a lot of people, and we see this a lot in some of the stories that come across our plates, a lot of people are just like, I think this looks cool, and don't give any thought to what's lying behind it all.
yeah. But at the same time, I think we all are aware on some level, and it behooves us as creators of art to examine our awarenesses and what we're promoting. I mean, even down at the basic level of, we like to make evil villains dark and heroines light.
Blonde.
That's
Yeah.
not really cool, actually. That's kind of terrible. And Disney has perpetuated a lot of crap over the years, and you can tell that they were trying to go for this sort of feminist, at least spunky, so that's about as feminist as Disney gets,
Right.
take on Rapunzel. And, if they were going to go that far, they could have gone a step further and not racially typified one of the characters. It's not that hard to not be a dick. Like... I know it seems really hard, but it's not. You just have to take a step back and think, if I were anything but a straight white guy, is there something here that would upset me? Like,
Yeah, and I think a lot of people just don't take those steps. I mean, it's something
it's the definition of privilege as a
Yeah.
straight.
I remember-
most of these creators are
We in
straight
the-
white men, and they don't have to.
we in kind of the outsider community have to
Yeah.
take those stands, and the gay community is the same way, because you look at things out there and you're like, how do they not see that that's offensive? And sometimes they really just don't, because it's just what they've been brought up with.
Yeah, there's a gay character. Aren't you happy?
No,
Good enough.
Exactly.
I actually remember I was reading this one book a few years ago. It was like a book about writing and the craft, and they were talking about like different personality types, and one of the personalities was gay, and I'm like, gay is not a personality.
No.
Like-
No. Well, and people have asked me if I got any grief over Palimpsest, and I mean, all of the characters in Palimpsest are bisexual, and some of them are
Vehemently so.
Yeah, they are extra. Some of them are gay-leaning bisexual, some of them are straight-leaning bisexual, and it's never commented on or discussed in the context of the book. And I think because I never discussed it, I never got any pushback, not from my editors, not from anybody else, because you can't separate the sexuality from the book. There is no palimpsest without bisexuality, without
Right.
functional, non-punished bisexuality.
Woven into
Yeah.
the
And, like,
fabric
And
of the
you
book.
can't pull it out.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking like even for the characters that are like like mostly straight leaning, who like end up like tipping the other way sometimes. There's never a big deal made out of it.
Yeah, and there's
I
no
actually
like
thought that,
horrible life crisis afterwards. Oh no, I did it with a dude.
Yeah.
It's fine because sexuality is a very fluid thing in that in our universe, not just that universe. It is very fluid.
I didn't do it with a dude. I did it with another person who had a tattoo.
Yeah.
That's the important part.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was very important to me from the very beginning of Palimpsest that all of the characters be particularly bisexual, because I'm bisexual, and we can find a number of gay and lesbian characters in media and a much larger number in print media these days, but there's still not a whole lot of bisexuals that aren't treated as freaks. They are the perverted ones, even in the gay community,
Right.
or dead by the end, and or dead or really, really sorry about what they've done in a nice little family, And I didn't want, again, I don't want any part of that, and
Right.
and so I wanted to write a book where that was just normal. And I think when you treat it as just normal, when gay is not a personality type, it is just one stat on your chart, then you can't separate it from the book, and you don't really get nearly as much a negative response to it.
Right.
Because how can you no one would have gotten through that book if they read there's a reason that the first sex scene is a lesbian sex scene. Like, although I know that that's probably the least offensive, but that it basically says
sort of like,
there's going to be gay up in here,
Hey.
right up front. Like, if you have a problem,
flag.
turn back now.
Spoilers, gay.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I think that was our buzzer indicating that we're running short on time. We need to let Ms. Valente get to her reading.
Okay.
And but thank you so much for coming down here a little bit early and chatting with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time
Yep.
to do it.
And we're going to stick around, of course, for the reading, and we hope that some of our listeners showed up and
Yay.
will also
I'm
be
actually
here.
really curious to walk back out there and see if anyone that I know is out there now.
Yeah, well, hopefully at least a couple. But thanks again. Again, the book that just came out is The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making.
Which is YA for young readers, but
Which is-
can be
and-
enjoyed by older readers
Right.
too.
And
It
there
can,
is no...
it can be your stepping stone into Palimpsest, which is very much not.
or into Deathless or Habitation of the Blessed, which are somewhat less... Actually, I don't know about Deathless. You've read that one.
Deathless is pretty sexy at points, not like Palimpsest levels.
Well, but it's
yeah.
it's definitely got strong sexual.
It's the whole
content.
I'm gonna bite you and make you bleed while you're chained to the wall in my basement, like that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, hot.
Cool.
Oh, real quick before we sign out though, and this is mostly for our listeners, I sort of have this reputation for writing really depressing stuff, but I also want to go on record to saying I never wrote anything that was set during the siege of Leningrad, which is one of the worst things to ever actually happen.
It is so upsetting, and on every level, the siege of Leningrad is so awful.
In your
as I
end
laugh
notes,
while
you were
saying it, it's so bad.
You mentioned in your end notes the research you did into it, and when I was done reading it, I'm let me just because obviously I have a vague impression of what happens. Let me just look up more of what actually
it's way
happened
worse
back then.
than,
And, I'm looking at the death tolls, and I'm this is horrible.
But we don't know very much about it in the U.S. because you can't make a good movie.
Yeah.
The Stalingrad is the one we like to make movies out of because there were sniper duels and explosions, and it's all very manly and fighty.
No, you're going to eat the toothpaste in the wallpaper.
Yeah, 3 years of starving to death slowly.
Wow.
It's not anything. It's one of the worst things that's ever happened in human history, and it was very important to me to treat that with respect in the book, and I hope I did.
So Deathless, boys and girls.
Yes, up with people. But it is also probably the funniest book I've ever written. For all of that.
I have to say, Baba Yaga, every time she is on page, I'm just love this. And Lebedeva, who, if you ever get this made into a movie, I want her played by Lady Gaga.
Oh my God, she would be amazing.
No, seriously,
She would be.
I'm just
She'd be so great.
if Lady Gaga were a magician, this is who she would be.
Oh my God, she would be. She'd be awesome.
You can have that for free. Just let everyone know you got it from me.
She has to get to a reading.
I know. You're going to shut up now.
All right. Well, thank you again. We've had a great
Thank
time,
you.
and we wish you great success in the future. And go check out the Books and Live Journal that we've tagged previously in the podcast.
Yep.
I'm Kyell Gold.
K.M. Hirosaki.
And
Being very modest now.
good night and keep writing.